Woo! I'm back next day. Sorry if I was flagging a little bit by the end there. I just had that final stretch feeling. I'm like, oh, we're gonna do this. And they both turned out to have a round 4, and I'm like, alright, I need to go to bed. That's officially too long. It's officially getting too late now. There's always a final stretch part where it's like the game's about to end, and I'm like, yes! Binge! Binge! In any given game. So it's that final, it always feels good. He stumbles quickly through a tale of the aristocratic ghost doomed to mingle with hobos for eternity. What? Just a version of the ghost of the well-heeled hobo. Right. That's one of the stories I've always had more trouble remembering what the story was originally. Makes it harder to piece together its meaning and all that. A lot of stories in this game, as it turns out, collectively, eventually get hard to remember. Nope, this again. Does not remember your preferences, so you gotta re-enable it each time. Yeah, we're on the right way though. Mostly south. I'm really familiar with this one spot, aren't I? I keep crossing this one bridge. Right. In Colorado. Oh, no, Denver's all the way up there. I was like, I could teleport to Denver. No. But I've crossed this specific crossing a funny number of times lately. I'm very curious to see what they're going to do with an ending. Like, is there a final challenge with the wolf of some sort, or is it just like, yo, good job, curse lifted, handshake, roll credits? I died once the entire game, it seems. And I was admittedly being a little passive about it. Although it was also the issue of, like, I was here. The empty part of the map. It might be actually shown by me clicking story. Yeah. That whole, like, there's such a density of stories everywhere else, but that area when I went across the north border, there just wasn't stories, weirdly. There just wasn't much going on in general. There definitely wasn't any people to rest with or any towns. So if there's no capital cities and there's no people, like characters, then you can't really recover. What states did I never set foot in? Looks like I got to the panhandle of Texas, but not really much of Texas. Louisiana I might have skipped over, and Arkansas and Mississippi a little bit. I might have just barely gotten into Mississippi, I think. So I think I skipped over largely Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas. Oh wow, yeah, I went like a circle around Kentucky without ever using Kentucky. Or I might have crossed it, but not done anything in it. And then Nebraska looks pretty circled around too. The coasts are definitely where there's a density of stuff though. So there's kind of a hurry to get from one coast to the other, where the most stuff's, where shit's happening, yo. It's sort of reinforced by the mechanics of the game too, the way that these campfires work. Like, they're happy to make me come to Shiprock like 12 times, but not Nebraska. After a while, the topic drifts to a strange place. She starts telling you about the cosmic nexus of interdimensional terror in a farmhouse cellar. Y'all know about interdimensionals? Neat. Went from being an indescribable horror in a farmhouse cellar to an interdimensional terror. Cosmic nexus. Did that one become Lovecraftian? Is that the basis here? Because Lovecraft was American, right? So I would expect a few stories to be directly tied to Lovecraft due to his endless seeming legacy around here with stories. Fly away. Whoa.
Crowds that sunk my ship took most of my side in the blast. Came home, couldn't work, couldn't read. But I could drink. That I could do. Easy as falling off a log. And I could lose my family. I could do that too. So I miss them blood-pounding adventure stories. You got any like that?
Damn. That is a visual. A harpoon that stabbed both the seagull and then him at once. He and the seagull are both crying. Or they're just leaking seawater? Because the seagull's wound is also spewing water. It looks like it's all they have left. Meanwhile, they're in a pool of with the hands of the drowned pulling them down. It's hard to say if he has PTSD issues like the other character does, but if nothing else, he definitely... I think he was wounded. And I think he feels guilty. I think he has survivor's guilt where everyone on his side of the ship died except for him. And then he's got... He might have suffered a head wound, though. He refers to it like he came back and he couldn't read, but he could drink. Like he couldn't work and he couldn't read. So it's hard to say if he has anything resembling the PTSD the other character seems to have, where he's torn. Because the other character perpetually lives in this back and forth between being in the war and being in modern now. And this guy kind of does too, but not himself as his being. It's more like there's all these connections he has to the dead. Like all of his connections are only lead to death, because that's all he has left. Happy times. Happy times. Let's tell him about banditos. Shit, I already did. Oh no. Why is he so into thrilling stories all of a sudden? The tyrannical farmer whose son killed himself in the grain silo. Jesus Christ, that one changed. That must have been one of the ones that I kind of couldn't read in time when it came and went. Shit, something thrilling. Oh wait, this dust is supposed to be thrilling, isn't it? I never got why. I'm like, isn't that bad?
My blood's pumping. That's the kind I used to like as a boy. This country. Navy wouldn't have me, but the mariners would. Until they wouldn't. What's it say about a country if it breaks its people and throws them away? But you tell me, what's the wildest thing you've seen on the roads out here? Anything good and exciting?
Oh, RNG is screwing me. He only wants exciting stories now. He completely changed gears. He used to like other types of stories. I mean, generally everyone does. That's how the game's what the game's kind of balanced around. Shit. Is future Boston exciting? I never remember this category.
That's the kind of adventure that sticks with you. My future. I got no pension. I got no family. You want to see my future? Buy me a bottle. But you tell me, what's the wildest thing you've seen on the roads out here?
Nope. Wow, he's one genre now. Got no pension, got no family. What's it say about a country when it breaks its people and then throws them away? They're not pulling punches here. And he's not wrong. He's still not wrong today. Is this exciting? The weird bull?
Ooh, tell another like that and you could write a good rag. Authority. I swore an oath to it. I swore to follow my superiors to the best of my ability. But what was their oath to me? Where's their loyalty when I need it? So I miss them blood-pounding adventure stories. You got any like that?
Whoa. Complete fixation, like it's a problem. Okay, Quinn, can you tip me over the edge? You're the only wild card I got left.
My blood's pumping. That's the kind I used to like as a boy. Travel taught me lots. I'd seen this world plenty. Beggars in every bar and port reach out with gnarled hands. But before it happened to me, I never seen anything like the way this country treats its servicemen. But you know, the books I miss the most is the hopeful ones. Got any of those?
Oh, now you suddenly have a different feeling. Well, I got you now, so what topic would I want to cover? The past? Yeah. The past fits. That's hopeful.
Leaves a warm feeling in your chest, huh? The past. Can't forget the night my men died, or how I would have joined them if not for my drinking making me late. But the bottle didn't bring me here. The Krauts did when they sunk my ship. Brothers left me. Wife and kid left me. Spend our whole lives living for the future, never realizing that when it comes, we'll have been forgotten. Sorry, mouth is dry from all this talking. And I reckon I got nothing left to say.
Oh. The campfire is still here. Is it because that's the wolf? I think it might be the wolf. Oh. The whole map's covered in wolves. That's spooky. That's probably one next to me too. I just can't see it past my own icon. He's covered the map. He's come for his due. I don't know why that one part of the timeline is empty. More time, apparently more times passed since then than since before then, huh? Yeah. That's around the time I died and went from being in the Midwest all the way back to the East Coast again, as you can see by Shaw showing up there. Hard to say the long-term usefulness of the screen. I'm not sure. I don't know what you do with this realistically. It's not visually interesting to look at for the most part because it's just a noise of icons because there's so many. Is that the wolf? You met Direwolf collecting his due by Minneapolis. Was that when I died the first time? That long ago? Weird. This is like a random time I don't know. There was a couple references to him in a couple stories, but not really. Dire Wolf. What else is new around here? A pendant skull with a distorted forehead. Takes it to Portland, Oregon. Beat up paperback with a lurid, bright cover promising adventure and more. Takes you to Seattle. A real man. South Seas, wartime, cowboy, medieval France, frontier West, rugged life. This guy's beating another guy in the head with a rifle. A rough turquoise pebble. Shiprock. Oh, here. Go figure. Los Angeles. El Paso. Was that a new one? That was a new one too, wasn't it? A peach pit carved into a rough shape of a flower. Oh, that's neat. I got all these collectible items. We had ourselves a fun little adventure that, for all I know, spanned 100 years. I'm bad at placing time and history, so I definitely was a little disoriented by trying to figure out when this was taking place sometimes. I just want to look at these pictures one last time. And Althea, the blues guitarist, the devil. August, the merchant marine. Bertha, the Dust Bowl refugee. Cassidy, the beat poet. Franklin, the Pullman porter. Curandera. Fidelina, the curandera. That's a nice little picture. Dupree, the gambler. Dahaya, the one who went upward. Jimmy, the preacher. Little Ben, the coal miner. Mason, the World War I veteran. So it was World War I. But weren't they referencing Vietnam? The hobo kid, Quinn. Shaw, the sharecropper. Rose, the hippie. The migrant worker, Rocio. And Ray, the cowboy. It's a lot to take in here. Let's take pictures. Not a particularly popular game, so these are actually hard images to get access to if you have any reason to. There we go. I got a few people that might appreciate some of that art. Coming home.
Congratulations, you finished your task. I hope in the end you at least found it fulfilling. Hearing stories is important work. Everyone wants to be heard, and so few are listening. Let's talk once more before you go your way.
Once more before you go your way. Okay, this is me picking topics for the most part. Imprisonment has a tie to what I went through here.
You'll be free of all of my traps soon.
But maybe now that you see some of the benefits of living with an oath to keep. Faith.
You should trust me to keep my bargain, yes, but you may not know the rules of the game, just as when we sat down to cards.
Country, home.
This place is home to so many. People who lived here, people who came here, people who were brought here. Strange that no one feels at home.
Strange that no one feels at home. Oh, this game had a whole relationship with authority from character to character.
Will there be someone else telling you what to do after this? I don't know. I truly don't.
Oh, he doesn't have a lot to say about these things, though. Freedom. That's where we're at, and it's got me on the card, the fool. Let's go catch the tornado.
You're free now. I wonder if it will be everything you wanted. Well, that is it then. The last night of your journey. And here you go, off into a new adventure. I hope the journey was valuable, and maybe the destination as well. Goodbye.
No, he didn't have much to say at the end. Did I just get vored?
I can say my piece, I can barter my tale, won't ease my burden, but I might as well. There's a heavy hand laid across this land, and it steers my journey and it guides my pen. Press on, head high till the ink is run dry, 'cause my story ain't like to wind home again. I'll beat my drum till my last day come, or the mountain meets the sea. Yeah, the earth will shake, but the bow she break won't put no fear in me. 'Cause I still land on high, so I'll get my final line. Sky will shimmer and sun will shine, where the water tastes like wine. Well, I wandered round and there's a code I found, says a gentle manner and a righteous way.
This pair you'll need if you follow this creed. She'll see you through until the judgment day.
tastes like wine.
So when the water's still and you feel that thrill, for the open trail has slipped away.
When the words won't flow, when your fingers run slow, and the song you carry goes dull and gray. Well, there's a place I've seen where the soul burns clean, and the verse it's singing rings pure and true. So cry no more, you just open that door. These shores of plenty gonna welcome you. And I beat my drum till the last day come, where the mountain meets the sea. Yeah, the earth will shake, but the bow she break won't bring no fear in me. 'Cause I see a land on high, so I pen my final line. I've said my fill and I'm feeling fine. Where the water tastes like wine.
Oh, is it just gonna loop?
If I turn my eyes from these cold blue skies,
It is just gonna loop. Alright, well that's enough of that for now. Well, I'm happy I played that. That was a good time. It was interesting. I obviously have some mixed feelings about it, like mechanically and all that. I don't know. It's got some strong writing in it, and it's got some great art and some great music, and it's a fun premise, but I feel like it could have been cooked up differently, for sure. Like the whole game could have kind of come out differently. It is interesting to see the weirdness of like this game and Death Stranding in parallel, and how both of them were kind of trying similar ideas of like drawing connections across the United States and traveling east to west, and all these are like there's some surprising comparisons to be made, although they are their own distinct things. And both of them have execution things where I'd like it seems like this could have been done differently. Although I largely do like the mechanics of Death Stranding. It's more the moment-to-moment writing is so dry that it seems like a mistake to do that to your players. Whereas this one, the moment-to-moment writing is really interesting. It's just that it doesn't necessarily come together in a meaningful way. And it feels like maybe that might be a little bit of a problem. Also, by the way, did the song that was just playing incorporate a woo into the lyrics? Like a wolf howl? Because I found that very amusing. It seems to all be original music for the game or something, or original recordings of songs that may or may not be original at the very least. Stuff like White Rider sounds like it might be something I've heard of before, but like, I don't know, somebody who's been uploading these videos, I don't get any copyright matches on these videos, so I think they might be all an original soundtrack at least, like the recordings, if nothing else. I feel like the mechanics of this game could definitely use an overhaul. This is the kind of game where a remake would be kind of nice, or just a different approach from the get-go. Kind of like the pathologic versus pathologic 2 thing to some extent, although maybe more severe. I think I got more out of pathologic 1 than I did out of this when it comes to the mechanics, because in this one I'm definitely like, huh, weird. There's some really good ideas. I like the idea of telling stories and collecting stories in order to unlock the secrets of somebody's true self, but just doing like a weird game of Uno where I just throw random stories at them, and they're like, ah, yes, you have a blue 7. I will now unlock my personality for you. Just feels weird, because like I'm just throwing random stories at them like, boy howdy, what a tale. Anyway, back to me getting deeper into who I am as a person. It kind of feels like it would be more meaningful if I was collecting particular stories that unlocked particular things with particular people. Like, it'd be interesting if they had a more adventure gamey logic where each story had a more directly mechanical usage to it. Like, what if particular characters had trauma or backstories that kind of was weirdly reminiscent of a certain American folk tale, and then collecting certain stories would resonate them in a really specific way, and we'd have a more personal interaction that felt less scattershot and random. Because as this game is, you're just telling them random stories that fit into 5 categories. Stories that simultaneously fit into 5 categories and 16 categories, because there's the category that determines their responses and the category that determines whether or not it's the right story to tell them to continue getting points with them. And I do appreciate the fact that they recorded 16 different pieces of dialogue per character just for that one element of the game, where you tell them different stories. And as far as I could tell, I think it was 16 different pieces of dialogue per chapter per character, which meant that as you got from chapter to chapter, you unlocked more phases of dialogue, which meant that for most characters it was 16 times 3, and for some characters it was 16 times 4, just for the tarot card responses, not even counting the main storyline dialogue they have at the beginning and end of each chapter, and the responses they have to individual things, and like all that. It's actually a decent chunk of dialogue per character, but it has too many ribs and not enough spine, if you know what I mean. I'm doing bone metaphors now because there's a skeleton in front of me. Like, the strong connective main primary thing that holds it all together and creates the through line for the characters was really brief. It was a little bookend of talking at the beginning and end of each chapter, just a couple lines. Whereas the 16 lines were just like random tangents that could all largely inform the stage that you're currently in, but because of the fact that players could be doing any of those 16, you could end up getting very different amounts of dialogue from chapter to chapter, from player to player, which leads to a kind of an inconsistent experience, which can be good or bad from game to game. But in this one, where you're trying to learn about characters, there's always the feeling that, what if I'm not picking the right ones, and maybe I'm not getting the right, like, elements of the personality of this character or something like that. But at the same time, just the main through line being stronger per character might be a little bit better. I feel like maybe they might have spread themselves a little too thin, having over 200 stories and 16 characters spread across the 50 states and all that. Like, that's the scale of that makes it kind of feel flat. And a lot of the elements of the game kind of felt flat. Like, there's the flatness to, like, the characters only having so much to do and say, and then they just kind of disappear and they move on with their lives, and doesn't quite have the arc that you were used to having with some stronger written characters in other games sometimes. That is like the moment when I say the writing good, when I say the writing was good, they did all right on the characters, but I mostly meant like moment to moment, like the prose and the actual experience of like encountering the dialogue and stories was pleasant and engaging. But on the macro scale, I'm not sure if the writing was great necessarily. The project seems scary ambitious, really. I love the idea of evolving stories over time, but as I said multiple times over the course of the playthrough, you don't get to encounter those evolved versions of the stories, which seems like a kind of a massive oversight, to the point where I almost wonder if it wasn't an oversight and if it was maybe a thing that they just didn't get around to and they ran out of budget and they had to move on with their lives or something. Because you evolve the stories twice, but you don't get to see those evolutions. So it just, at most, it can pay homage to things like where if you already are fully versed in each story, then you're like, oh, it's the Thunderbirds. Oh, it's the Blue Bull guy that I've forgotten the name of apparently. It's the Jersey Devil. Is this Lovecraft? I'm not sure. Like things like that. But if you don't know the story, then it's like, oh, you get a little pop-up in the corner of the screen that says a slightly different version of a description of how something kind of worked, maybe a little bit. And you're like, okay, sure, why not? They went from being a indescribable horror to being an interdimensional horror. Okay, but like you never get to hear the final version of any of these stories, so if you're not fully versed in those stories, you just don't even know what they're talking about half the time. And you can't review the stories, so you can't read them. So if you don't know what category something fits into, you actually can't really figure it out besides trial and error, because the icons don't tell you which of the 5 categories it goes into. It only tells you which of the 16 categories it goes into, which is a different part of the equation. I don't know. I also didn't feel like I was evolving the stories, which kind of would have felt nice. Like, in a game about stories evolving, you don't get to modify the stories over time or change them or like try to engage in this act of making a story less true but more effective and all that. It's a thing that happens automatically in the background with the overall community, which I said before also happens too slowly. Like, generally speaking, I can pick up like 5 stories for every like 1 time I get a level up spot that makes one story like progress a little bit. So not only do you not get to experience them in their final form, but you also rarely get to level up any of them anyway, because you have to like practically actively exploit the game in order to do the level up sequence that's built into the story. But like the level up sequence isn't interesting because it happens passively and you have no hand in it. The only thing you do is choose stories so like your only incentive is to kind of try to pick stories that aren't level 3 yet. But once you have a full arsenal of level 3 stories, you kind of have no real reason to swap out stories ever again. Because like it's not like leveling them up is particularly engaging for you, because the act of leveling them up doesn't even tell you what the final story is. At most, it gives you a token reference to something that maybe you already knew before you played the game, and then you can fill in the gaps of like, oh, they're talking about the Thunderbird thing or whatever. But without that context, you're like, oh, now it's a level 3 story that I don't understand instead of a level 1 story that I kind of understood because I was there for that part at least. So it's kind of a weird mixed bag. And as I showed, once I got to the West Coast, I did eventually swap out the entire left side of my screen to be fully leveled stories and the entire right side of my screen to be level 1 stories as best I could. And then I never switched stories again for the entire West Coast. And that kind of showed that like you could totally just not switch out your stories once you have a good roster. Like I would have been in an even better situation if I had all level 3 stories and just stuck with them for the rest of the game. You can totally defeat all of the different people progression systems with just that. So like your primary incentive for leveling up other stories instead of just staying with the same roster for the rest of the game should be that those stories are engaging at the very least, since apparently they don't serve any mechanical purpose. But like I said before, that would be addressed if the particular stories had particular connections to particular people. Like maybe at least like maybe the final defeat of each character. Like maybe you like butter them up with a bunch of different stories, but maybe the final thing you need to do is find the perfect story that sets them free or something like that, of like whatever their thing that they're holding on to in a sort of Ni no Kuni sort of way, I suppose, would be to like have the particular story that's the key to their lock essentially and has a resonance with them, and then you can talk about that story and really dissect it and have some interesting dialogue there, and also make it feel like there's a reason to keep collecting stories, because once you have a full roster of high level stories that are diverse, then you just don't need any more, and there's hundreds more, and like the primary thing you're encountering when you're walking around is just collecting more stories, but they're just not implemented into the game mechanically in a good way or narratively in a good way, because all you get is the story itself. Like I kept doing it because I enjoyed that part of the game, just talking to someone, clicking on a random building and having a story happen to you for like 2 minutes, but like they had no larger significance. I wasn't collecting more stories that were going to help me with the game, and they weren't going to have any effect on the other stories around them or affect the world or affect the people. Like they were just going to go into my giant bag of stories and be forgotten like a hoarder. And so having to be actively engaged in those stories and be like, oh, was this one do this one? Or, oh, what if this one connects to that person? Will kind of have more of that adventure gamey thinking that might lead to more interesting gameplay. Because as it goes, this is mostly just an interesting experiment. It's a really cool idea, and they did an execution of it. And it's like, it has that like, the flatness almost reminds me of like games from like the 90s or even earlier, where like a game would just be a very raw execution of a certain idea, and there wasn't a lot of change to it, because like the games used to be more pure and more direct in what they were doing, if you know what I mean. And this game kind of does that to an extent, where it's like the game is just such a flat execution of a particular idea, and it doesn't really change over the course of the game. And it's like, it's really like you get dumped out into the world, you're told what the game is, and then you just go, and then you just kind of run out of game eventually, and they're like, hope you found meaning in it, goodbye. And then you get vored. Which definitely was more common before, and sometimes it's still the thing today, but oftentimes some kind of overall progression throughout the game is kind of a goal. And I don't mean like RPG mechanics, I mean like generally there's like a mechanical escalation over the course of a game, be it like increasingly difficult platforming challenges or this or that thing, or like you're getting things that like, or like my idea of like having the stories be particularly connected to particular people. Like maybe you might even get a clue, like when you're talking to the person, they have a particular resonance to the particular location, and then when you go investigate that location, you get a story, and then if you evolve that story to level 3, then that story could be the key to setting them free. Like just anything that means more mechanically than what happens, which was kind of just a sandbox, really. I think I stand by what I said before, that like the best way to experience this game might be to just have it on the Switch. I haven't double checked, but I think it came out on Switch. Because like as a handheld game or a phone game, where you just kind of flick away at it for like 10 minutes at a time, and then go back to what you're doing, and then like you might be playing it over the course of months. It's not a bad like little time waster thing of like, oh, here's some more stories. I'm gonna go over to Missouri, see what happens in Missouri, and just kind of wander around. Like as that kind of game, it might be more fulfilling. Whereas like if you kind of blaze through the whole thing, and are engaged in the process of progressing through it, and are thinking about it as a cohesive whole and what it means and what its mechanics are doing, it kind of doesn't go anywhere, and it's kind of a bummer. Even the ending, like it was just kind of like goodbye. Like it really did just say like, well, you did the thing I said to do. Hope it meant something to you. See you later. Like there's an element of that, and it's like there wasn't really like a thesis or an ending beyond potentially just the very value of just collecting stories and going on an adventure, I suppose. And it's like it kind of felt like there wasn't just. I kind of wonder sometimes like if there was like if the authors had a point that they were going for necessarily, or if they just kind of went around and all that. I don't know. I'm kind of flailing now at this point. It's a neat game, but it could have been a good game. I don't necessarily think it was a good game. It was just a neat game, which I'm game for. I'm very much like, this is, as somebody who does this every day and plays video games all the time, weird experimental shit that does something genuinely new, even if it doesn't do it very well, is kind of what I'm here for sometimes. Just the weird experience of like a different, strange idea being explored, and then hoping like maybe that'll come up again later. Because like there are games I play and then forget about, and then there are games that I play and then I'll refer to them periodically for years probably as a particular idea of an execution of this concept or that thing, or like, oh yeah, you know, that game does that thing and da 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 da. Like it's part of the addiction of like why people keep referring to like Dark Souls and stuff like that for years, because it becomes like Dark Souls or Papers, Please or something will become like a particular, like it'd be like a mountain peak that everyone can see from all these different angles, that whenever certain topics come up, they're like, oh, it's like that game does that thing, and like it becomes interesting and worth talking about. And Death Stranding is probably going to be that way for people too. It's just a particularly weird thing that executes on a particular idea, whether good or bad, can often become the tentpole discussion piece for a long time when certain topics come up, because it becomes a new reference point to anchor onto. Because that's how we would talk about art and many other aspects of life, is you do it in a referential way. People will complain if you stop comparing games to other games, let them stand on their own. But like, art doesn't exist in a vacuum. Everything exists in the context of all the other stuff that already exists, generally speaking. And that's how we process stuff, is in the context of everything else. And that's also the context in which it was created. So it does things to disservice to pretend that things can't be compared to other things and all that. And it's like, this is I think this game is a potentially useful growth of video game vocabulary, and another exploration of the idea of making a game that's not based around violence and trying to figure out what to do with that. Because violence is such a default. Go through area, defeat enemies a long way through area, finish area is like such a go-to language for how video game works. It's part of the syntax. That games that explore that in any different ways are all valuable because they actually can push the art form forward and we can learn new things, and that's good. Because that's how you get the really weird, interesting things. Like, that's how a Papers, Please or an Oberdin happens. And it's not about being pretentious or holier than thou, or like, you think video games have to be violent, I'm above violence. Like, people act all judged if you criticize violence in video games, and there are some aspects that can be criticized on the aspect of like the violence itself potentially being a problem in some ways sometimes or whatever. But really, oftentimes when people talk about that, they're more talking about the idea of like not the morality of violence but the flatness of violence. It's like similar to how when people talk about like so many protagonists of video games being straight white men, it's not always just about representation but also about like quality of writing and doing different things with games. Because if every game has the same protagonist and is the same genre and we just kind of keep flatly iterating on the same ideas forever, that's just stagnation for an art form, and you can go so many different directions with that stuff. And I find that stuff interesting, and that's one of my primary goals oftentimes on this channel and so on, is just to explore and see what I can find. And so I hope you guys enjoyed this weird journey down a weird game that's probably horribly flawed, but it definitely gave its fucking heart into this. Like, they tried, and they put some money into this with this voice acting group and the art and the music. Like, they went all in. And hopefully their next project is progress for them. Hopefully they haven't like closed already. I don't know. Am I gonna look up this company and find out that they already closed doors after this game or something like that? Because that happens a lot. That's always sad. I don't know. Thanks for watching like always, guys. I'll see you next time.